My parents converted my savings for my brother's startup, claiming, "He has vision. You don't." When it failed, I reclaimed what was left through legal channels they never saw coming. I, 29M, discovered my life savings had been stolen on a Tuesday morning, sitting in a coffee shop, trying to withdraw money from my apartment deposit. The transaction declined. I tried again. Declined. My account balance showed $847 where there should have been $64,000. 6 years of careful saving from my engineering job, living below my means, skipping vacations, driving a 10-year-old car. I called the bank immediately, hands shaking, convinced someone had hacked my account. The representative pulled up my transaction history. 3 wire transfers over the past 2 weeks, each initiated with proper security credentials, all sent to an account I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped when she read the dates. I'd been on a work trip to Seattle during that time. Someone had accessed my account remotely using information only a few people knew. I drove straight to my parents' house. They lived 20 minutes away in the suburbs where I grew up, in the same house with the crooked mailbox and Mom's rose garden. My younger brother's car sat in the driveway, a new Tesla Model 3 that seemed odd considering he'd been unemployed for 8 months. Mom answered the door with that nervous smile she wore when she knew I'd be upset about something. Dad sat in his recliner, not looking up from his newspaper. My brother stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, wearing expensive sneakers I'd never seen before. I asked about my money. Simple question. Direct. Mom's smile faltered. She exchanged a glance with Dad, who finally lowered his newspaper. He launched into this explanation about family and opportunity and how my brother had this incredible business idea, a tech startup that would revolutionize meal planning using AI. Investors were interested. He just needed seed money to build the prototype and secure meetings. I asked why they didn't discuss this with me first, why they stole from my account. Dad's face hardened. He said it wasn't stealing. They were listed as beneficiaries on my account from when I was 17, before I updated anything. They had legal access. He said I'd been hoarding money unnecessarily while my brother, who had real vision and entrepreneurial spirit, needed support to launch something meaningful. I had a stable job and would make more money. This was about family investing in family. My brother finally spoke, saying I'd never understood what it took to build something from nothing. I was just a code monkey collecting a paycheck, but he was trying to create something that mattered. I left without saying another word. That night, I called my cousin who practiced law in the city. She specialized in financial disputes and family law. I explained everything: the unauthorized transfers, my parents' admission, their justification. She listened carefully, asked specific questions about my account setup, when I'd last updated beneficiary information, and whether I had documentation of my savings history. She told me I had options. While my parents technically had legacy access to my account, using it to transfer funds without my knowledge or consent, especially when I was an independent adult with clear ownership, constituted financial exploitation. She could send a demand letter immediately, and if they didn't return the money within 30 days, we'd file suit for conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially financial elder abuse statutes that, ironically, also covered adults whose family members exploited their trust. I said yes. Do it. The demand letter arrived at my parents' house 3 days later. Dad called within an hour, furious. He said I was tearing the family apart over money, that I was being selfish and vindictive. How could I threaten to sue my own parents? My brother needed that money. The startup was already underway. Contracts were signed. Equipment was purchased. I told him they had 30 days to return every cent plus interest, or I'd see them in court. Then I hung up. My phone exploded with messages. Mom sent tearful texts about how disappointed she was, how she'd raised me better than this. My brother called me a petty bastard who couldn't stand seeing someone else succeed. Extended family members I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions, telling me to be reasonable, to think about family unity, to give my brother a chance. I blocked most of them, changed my number, updated all my banking information and security protocols. 28 days passed with no returned money. My cousin filed the lawsuit. We requested an emergency hearing given the financial harm and ongoing depletion of assets. My parents' attorney, some friend of Dad's who did real estate law, tried to argue family gift exemptions and implied consent. My cousin demolished him. She presented my banking records showing systematic saving patterns over 6 years. My lease applications and correspondence proving I was saving for specific goals. Screenshots of messages where I'd explicitly discussed my savings with friends, establishing my intent and ownership. Most importantly, she had my updated account beneficiary forms from 2 years ago that the bank had somehow failed to process properly. My parents' access should have been revoked. The judge was not pleased. He ordered an immediate asset freeze on my parents and brother. Everything locked down pending investigation. He scheduled a full hearing for 2 weeks out. That's when things got interesting. Update 1. My brother's startup, TechEats AI, or whatever ridiculous name he'd chosen, existed only as a website mock-up and a rented office space he'd already stopped paying for. The investors he'd mentioned were phantom. The contracts were proposals he'd sent to companies that never responded. The equipment he'd purchased was a high-end gaming computer, professional camera gear, and that Tesla, all personal items he'd claimed were business necessities. My cousin's team uncovered bank statements showing my brother had burned through $47,000 in 6 weeks. Luxury purchases, expensive dinners, bar tabs, electronics. The remaining $17,000 sat in his account, untouched, like he'd planned to pace himself after the initial spending spree. When confronted in deposition, my brother claimed everything was legitimate business development, networking dinners, brand building, necessary equipment for content creation to attract investors. His attorney, clearly frustrated, tried to frame it as typical startup spending. My cousin asked one simple question. Where was the business plan? Where were the financial projections? Where was any evidence of actual work toward a functioning business? My brother had nothing. He'd apparently spent 6 weeks telling everyone he was building a revolutionary startup while actually just spending my money like he'd won the lottery. My parents, meanwhile, tried to play the victim card. Mom cried on the stand, explaining they'd only wanted to help their struggling son, that they didn't realize what they'd done was wrong. Dad insisted they'd intended to pay me back once the business took off and my brother made his first million. The judge asked when they'd planned to inform me of this loan I'd apparently given. Dad had no answer. Court records became public. Word spread through our extended family, our community. The narrative my parents had carefully constructed, responsible son refusing to help visionary brother, collapsed. People saw what actually happened. Parents stealing one son's money to fund the other's delusions. My aunt, Dad's sister, called me directly. She apologized for believing their version initially. She told me Dad had been bragging for weeks about how my brother was going to be the next tech billionaire, how he'd always known my brother had special potential. She'd found it odd, but didn't question it until she saw the court filings. Other relatives reached out similarly. Cousins who'd sent me angry messages now sent apologies. My grandmother, Mom's mother, called to tell me she was ashamed of how her daughter had behaved. The hearing concluded on a Friday afternoon. The judge ruled comprehensively in my favor. He ordered my parents to return the remaining $17,000 immediately, plus $30,000 from their personal savings within 60 days to cover the spent portion. He added $5,000 for my legal fees and emotional distress. He also mandated they pay 8% annual interest on the full amount calculated from the date of the first unauthorized transfer. But he didn't stop there. He issued a permanent injunction preventing my parents or brother from accessing any of my accounts, attempting to claim financial interest in my assets, or contacting me regarding financial matters. Violation would result in contempt charges. My brother's assets remained frozen until he repaid his portion. The court held him equally liable since he'd knowingly received stolen funds. The Tesla was to be surrendered and sold, proceeds applied to the debt. His bank account would be garnished until the full amount was recovered. My father's face went blank when the judge read the ruling. Mom sobbed. My brother stormed out before the hearing ended. I felt nothing, just tired. Update 2. Collecting the money took 3 months of aggressive enforcement. My parents dragged their feet, claiming financial hardship, trying to negotiate payment plans. My cousin filed for contempt. The judge wasn't interested in their excuses. They'd had months to prepare, and they'd instead spent that time mounting a defense based on lies. They emptied their savings, borrowed from Dad's retirement account. Mom sold jewelry. They paid in installments, bitter and resentful with each transfer. My brother fought harder, insisting he shouldn't have to surrender the car, that he needed it for job interviews. The court didn't care. The Tesla sold at auction for $38,000. Combined with his garnished wages from the retail job he'd finally gotten, I recovered his portion within 4 months. The final payment came through on a Wednesday. I checked my account balance, $69,247.63. More than I'd started with, thanks to interest and the settlement additions. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. My family was destroyed. Thanksgiving came and went without speaking to my parents. Christmas too. My grandmother tried to play mediator, suggesting we all move past this for the sake of family unity. I told her there was nothing to move past. They'd made their choice when they stole from me, and I'd made mine when I held them accountable. My brother sent one message after everything settled. He said I'd ruined his life over money I didn't even need, that I'd always been jealous of him, that I was a vindictive asshole who cared more about being right than about family. I didn't respond. What was there to say? He'd spent 6 years of my disciplined saving in 6 weeks on toys and ego, then blamed me for the consequences. My parents never apologized. Not once. Even after everything, the court rulings, the exposed lies, the public humiliation, they maintained they'd done nothing wrong. Dad told relatives I'd overreacted, that family was supposed to support each other unconditionally. Mom said I'd broken her heart by choosing money over my brother's dreams. They'd learned nothing. 6 months after the final payment, I bought my apartment. 2-bedroom condo downtown, walking distance from work. I furnished it carefully, deliberately. Everything in it was mine, earned and chosen and protected. My cousin came to the housewarming party I threw. So did my Real friends, colleagues who'd supported me through the legal battle, my grandmother despite the family tension. I didn't invite my parents or brother. I didn't announce the purchase on social media where they might see it. My grandmother asked if I'd ever forgive them. I told her I already had. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I'd released my anger months ago. But forgiveness also didn't require me to expose myself to people who'd shown me exactly who they were when they thought they could get away with it. She seemed sad but understanding. Life moved forward. I got promoted at work. Started dating someone who knew the whole story and didn't judge me for enforcing boundaries. Made new investments, this time with proper legal protections and no family access whatsoever. My brother's social media showed him working regular jobs, living in a shared apartment, talking vaguely about his next big idea. He'd changed nothing about his worldview, still convinced he was destined for greatness, just temporarily delayed by unfair circumstances. My parents posted occasional family photos that conspicuously excluded me. Holidays with my brother and his girlfriend. Dinners with cousins. They'd constructed a narrative where I'd excommunicated myself, where they were the abandoned parents suffering from an ungrateful son's cruelty. I didn't correct anyone anymore. People who mattered knew the truth. Update 3. 2 years after the lawsuit, my brother's next startup attempt failed before launching. He'd found some actual investors this time. Friends from college who believed his pitch. They'd pooled $30,000. 6 months later, the product didn't exist, the money was gone, and my brother was facing another lawsuit. This one from people who weren't family and didn't hesitate to pursue charges. I heard about it through my grandmother. She asked if I'd help him, maybe speak on his character, something. I declined. His pattern was clear. Take money, spend recklessly, blame others when it inevitably collapsed. Me vouching for him would only enable the cycle and damage my own credibility. The investors won their judgment. My brother declared bankruptcy. My parents called me for the first time in 2 years. Dad's voice was smaller than I remembered. He asked if we could meet, talk, maybe find a way forward. Mom was on the extension, silent but present. I asked what had changed. Dad admitted they'd been wrong. Not about the principle. He still thought helping family was right. But about the execution, about not asking me first, about how they'd handled everything after. He said they'd lost friends over this, that family gatherings were awkward, that they were tired of the division. I told him I'd consider meeting if they met 3 conditions: a written apology acknowledging specifically what they'd done wrong, a promise to never financially support my brother's business ventures without proper vetting and his own skin in the game, and an agreement that our relationship, if rebuilt, would have clear boundaries they wouldn't test. Dad said he'd think about it. I didn't expect to hear back. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a 2-page handwritten letter from Mom. She acknowledged taking my money without permission. Acknowledged that it was theft regardless of technical account access. Acknowledged they'd enabled my brother's irresponsible behavior for years, always bailing him out, always making excuses. She wrote that she'd been so focused on helping her struggling child that she'd failed to see she was actually hurting both her sons, punishing responsibility and rewarding recklessness. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she understood if I never wanted a relationship again, but she wanted me to know she finally understood what she'd done. Dad's note was shorter, attached to Mom's. He wrote that he'd spent 2 years defending their actions because admitting wrongdoing meant admitting he'd failed as a father. He'd finally accepted that his failure wasn't in acknowledging the mistake, it was in making it in the first place. I sat with those letters for a week, read them multiple times, looked for loopholes, for hedging language, for subtle blame shifting. Found none. I invited them to lunch. Neutral location, public place. We met on a Saturday afternoon. It was awkward. Stilted conversation. Long pauses. But it was something. I told them I wasn't ready to resume a full relationship. Too much had happened. Trust, once broken this completely, didn't repair quickly. But I was willing to try supervised interactions. Occasional lunches. Holiday phone calls. See what developed naturally without forcing it. Mom cried. Dad nodded, jaw tight. They agreed. My brother wasn't mentioned. I made clear he wasn't part of any reconciliation process. They didn't argue. 3 years after everything started, I had a cautious, limited relationship with my parents. We met monthly. Conversations stayed surface level, work, weather, neutral family updates. They respected my boundaries. Didn't push for more than I offered. Didn't bring up my brother unless I asked. I asked once, about 6 months into our renewed contact. Dad said he was working steadily now, had given up on startup dreams, was seeing a therapist about his spending problems and unrealistic expectations. They no longer gave him money beyond small birthday gifts. He'd moved across the country for a job opportunity. I felt relieved more than anything. Distance helped everyone. My life was stable now. Career advancing. Serious relationship developing. Savings rebuilt and growing, properly protected. The trauma from that Tuesday morning discovering my empty account had faded to a scar. Present, but not painful. Sometimes I wondered if I'd overreacted, if family really should have taken precedence over money, if my brother might have actually succeeded with better support. Then I'd remember the court documents showing his spending. $800 dinners, $3,000 watches, bottle service at clubs. Not a struggling entrepreneur making sacrifices, just someone spending money he hadn't earned on a lifestyle he couldn't afford. I'd made the right choice. Protecting myself wasn't cruelty. Enforcing consequences wasn't vindictiveness. Sometimes love meant saying no. Sometimes family meant walking away. My apartment had appreciated significantly. My retirement accounts were healthy. My career trajectory was strong. I'd built the life I'd been saving for, despite the detour through legal battles and family implosion. And I'd learned the most important lesson. Trust, once given carelessly, costs more than money ever could. Some people saw you as a resource to exploit. Even family, especially family, sometimes, because they knew exactly which vulnerabilities to target. I protected mine now, fiercely, unapologetically, and I slept soundly because of it. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.